Ta-da. So for those of you who are with me on Instagram, thank you so much for your patience. We're popping this around. We're talking today about what can we diagnose with iridology, because this is a really, really important topic. There are so many people who do all kinds of stuff that is just really strange with this. And I'm out to set the record straight. And what gives me the right to do that? The fact that I have been an iridologist for 40 years. I've been an iridologist for 4 decades now. I've studied several different styles of iridology, and I have, over the years, thrown out the things that didn't work, and I've hung on to the things that did work. So my name is Judith Cobb. I'm a master herbalist, a natural nutrition clinical practitioner, a certified iridologist, and a certified comprehensive iridology instructor. If you've been hanging out with me for any length of time, you know that I have 2 missions in my business. The first one is to mentor practitioners who are struggling in their businesses because they spend their own time unpaid and after hours creating client programs. So that's the first one. I want to give practitioners back their own free time instead of having them donate so many hours to clients. And there's a difference between donating and getting paid, right? The second mission is to teach the truth about iridology and its proper application in a wellness practice. And this is so important because there's so much wrong information circulating out there from outdated iridology. All right. And so with that in mind, let's dive into the topic for today. And that is, what can we diagnose with iridology? Now, the first thing we need to understand is, what does the word diagnose mean? Diagnose means naming a disease. So when you go to a doctor or a naturopath and they run tests and they analyze the results and they name a disease, right? They give the disease a name and then they create a treatment protocol from that disease name, right? That is a diagnosis. That's not a bad thing to do, but we have to remember that the statistics suggest that diagnostic errors occur in up to 20% of the cases based on autopsy reports. And this is based on a British Medical Journal, volume 22, issue supplement 2, where they said that after all is said and done, when a person finally passes away and they do the autopsy, they go, oops, we got it wrong. Now, here's the challenge with that. And the challenge is that when a person's situation is treated based on a disease name, the treatment may be incorrect. The protocol may be incorrect, right? So maybe we actually, as iridologists, don't want to name diseases. We've all heard of cases where once a disease label is attached, it's very hard to remove. And of course, then the treatment is done by that disease label, and that becomes an issue. So an additional question actually that we need to answer is, what value does it have in assessing client needs and creating wellness programs? What value could iridology have in this? Let's look at some iris photos and see what we can diagnose. We're going to look at one case of a doctor-diagnosed case of ADHD. We're going to look at 4 cases of polycystic ovarian syndrome and 1 case of sphincter of body dysfunction. All right. For those of you who are on Instagram, I know your image isn't great. I will be moving my camera back and forth so that you can see the image better. So again, what is the value of constitutional iridology as an assessment tool in a holistic wellness practice? So here is our case of a 10-year-old boy who was diagnosed with ADHD. So sorry, I'm not trying to make you seasick on Instagram. Just want to get this close enough that you can see what we're looking at. There we go. The vast majority of children who have ADD or ADHD have these rings coming around their eyes. Now, these are called contraction furrows. And many of them also have these lines radiating outwards. These are called radial furrows. So what we need to remember is that it appears that while most children who have a diagnosis of ADHD have these markers, not all people who have these markers have ADHD. Okay, do you understand that correlation, that almost all children who are diagnosed with ADHD and even adults have these markers, But just because you've got this set of markers doesn't mean you actually have ADD or ADHD. Now, why would these play into something like ADD or ADHD? Now, when we look at ADD and ADHD, we have to understand a couple of things. We have to understand that this is a person who typically lives in the sympathetic nervous response field. So they are alert to every stimulus that is going on. It's very difficult for them to filter out unimportant stimuli and ignore it completely. And so as we look at these eyes, we recognize that, hello, Art of Health, good to see you on Instagram. As we look at these eyes, what we see is these contraction furrows combined with radial furrows suggest that this person burns through their B vitamins, vitamin C, calcium quickly. When they are properly nourished for their own needs, they like to have to-do lists. They like to have a direction in what they are doing, and they like to accomplish things. We know that children and people in general who have ADD and ADHD also tend to burn through B vitamins very quickly, and they tend to respond very well to the proper B vitamin protocol for them, as well as the proper diet. However, we need far more information than that. We're not going to look at the eyes and go, oh my goodness, you've got ADD, ADHD, here's a handful of B vitamins. That is the wrong thing to do. We need more information. When we see these patterns in the eye, we need to ask, what are the child's sleep patterns like? How does this child handle stress, frustration, and anxiety? What is this child's favorite learning mode? Is this person audio, visual, or kinesthetic? And typically with ADD kids, they are kinesthetic more than they are audio or visual. So we probably need to teach this child how to use their body in the learning process. The worst thing for this child in a classroom situation or learning situation is to put him behind a desk and tell him to sit still. Instead, put him in the gym or and give him something physical to do, have him practice his multiplication tables while he's bouncing a ball against the wall. Or, you know, if he needs to do some kind of a drawing, give him chalk and let him draw the chalk on the chalkboard, or take him outside to the playground and let him draw his picture on the playground. So it's a big body experience, but involve his body, get him using it. For an adult, again, don't put him behind a desk. Don't make him be an accountant. That would probably be the death of him. Put him in a gym as a trainer, or put him out landscaping or surveying, or better yet, put him in a school as a gym teacher, or even in the classroom as a teacher, because he's going to be a much more physical teacher and it's going to really intrigue the children. There are so many other imbalances that can contribute to ADD, ADHD, but understanding these markers in particular does give us a bit of an insight, and it helps us to understand a little bit more about the kinds of appropriate therapies or recommendations or herbs and vitamins and diet work that we can do with this person. This is one of my clients who came to me with polycystic ovarian syndrome. Now, when she first came to me, she didn't have that diagnosis. Now, we need to understand that there are many different causes of infertility. PCOS is just one of them. And we need to understand that even within that umbrella assessment of PCOS, that there are many factors that can play into it. So as we look at the next 3 or 4 sets of eyes where we're looking specifically at PCOS, you're going to see that they are all very different from one another. So it's not that one mark means one disease. If that was the case, medical doctors would be using this, right? What it is it's an understanding of what the markings mean for the chemistry of the body, and then asking the client about what symptoms they're experiencing and putting those two things together. So as we look at this particular client, she has many of these petal shapes in her eyes, right? And this suggests that she has a hard time keeping her blood sugars and her hormones balanced. And so this means that what we have to do with her first and foremost, and this is fairly common with PCOS, that they often have a blood sugar imbalance, but it's not always because they have this type of a marking in their eye. With this client, what we did, and the only thing we did, because she was on a very limited budget, was we cleaned up her diet. We got rid of the fast food. We got rid of the junk food. She is second generation Canadian from Germany. And so she loves the rich, heavy, sweet, fatty foods from her German heritage. So we had to clean up her diet tremendously. And when we did, her menstrual cycles evened out. She actually lost 60 pounds in about 6 months just by cleaning up her diet. And then she went on to get pregnant and have a successful pregnancy. And so again, we needed to find out things like, what was her diet like? What was her menstrual cycle like? Had she ever been pregnant? And she actually had one tubal pregnancy, an ectopic pregnancy, before she came to see me. But again, this is the thing that for this client explained why her hormones, why her periods were getting too far apart, and helped us to understand the direction we needed to go to. Oh, Lynn Cap, thank you so much. It looks like you're enjoying this and getting something out of this. Smiley face with hard eyes. Thank you so much. This is another one of my clients who came to me for fertility reasons. As we started our conversation, it was that she and her husband had been trying for a couple of years to get pregnant. And so first question is, how far apart are your cycles? And they were 75 days. Okay, so that right there suggests that she probably is PCOS. But I needed to understand more. So I looked at her eyes and I saw that she has these rings. You remember, we saw these in the little boy who had ADHD. And it meant that he burned through his B vitamins way too quickly, his B vitamins, vitamin C, calcium, and magnesium. Well, we also see some subtle indicators in this eye that this woman may also be prone to possibly the MTHFR defect, which means Lynn Cap has PCOS. We should talk. Which means that she may not be able to properly prepare her B vitamins for her nervous system to use, or for her hormone system to use properly. And so when we see these contraction furrows, I asked her, how does she handle stress? Now, her darling husband came with her, and he kind of rolled his eyes and he laughed, and I said, tell me. And he said that because they're both accountants, he knows when the busy seasons are, because they have them both, and they're in different companies that they work for. He said he knows when her busy seasons are hitting, and he just makes sure that he's got supper prepared for her when she comes home. He feeds her and he sends her up to the bedroom to rest for the evening, because she doesn't handle the stress. And so with this client, what we had to do was we had to fix her diet. She craved carbs viciously and ate them generously, even though she was not overweight. She was a very petite thing. And so we cleaned up her diet. We gave her the B vitamins in the right format. We got her cycles down to 35 days. And she went on the fertility clinic. They'd been there, and the fertility clinic told her that the only thing she could do would be metformin and Clomid. And if that didn't work, they would have to get into more invasive techniques. Well, she didn't want to use the metformin, and for good reason. It's not the best drug to use. And we were able to make it that she didn't need the metformin at all by fixing her diet. We did ultimately use the Clomid for one cycle with some herbs to help her ovulate better. And it was actually the cycle after that that she was able to conceive. And that's a very common thing. She did conceive, had a healthy pregnancy, had a very easy labor and delivery. And that was another example of PCOS. But do you see how different these eyes are from the last ones? There's no such thing as a classic PCOS eye. Here we have another client who came to me. She also ended up with a diagnosis of PCOS, but I figured that out early on. She was about 20 when she came to see me, and her main concern was that she was gaining weight. Now, I don't know of any 20-year-olds who want to be gaining weight. And so she was gaining weight. She wanted to not gain weight. right? She was in university, away from home. And so we talked about her diet, very high carb eating on campus, which means high carb foods typically. So I asked her about her menstrual cycle. Are her periods regular? She said yes. And I said, so do you have a period every month? And she said, well, yeah, every month, but they're about 3 or 4 weeks late. And I went, okay, let's do the math. So you're telling me your cycles are really 7 to 8 weeks apart? To which she said yes. And I went, okay, that helps, because that again is a key marker of PCOS. As I did iridology with her, for those of you on Instagram, I'm going to try to get really close to show you what I'm seeing in the blow up. And I got to look through my hand here. Okay. Can you see this right here? We've got this fiber that's lifted right up off the iris. You could literally slide a pin under that, right? It's called a gateway arch. This has a very, very strong correlation to major predispositions towards blood sugars being imbalanced. And so when we saw that, I actually started to giggle. And of course, she looked at me strangely. I said, well, this is very cool because this explains so much. Now, she's also got the contraction furrows. So you remember what that means about her B vitamins, vitamin C, calcium, and magnesium, right? So we started talking about what control could she get over her foods. Could she get rid of the high carbs? Did she have the opportunity to actually prepare her food herself? She said, yes, she had access to a kitchen in her apartment. And yes, the grocery store was about 2 miles away and she did not have a car. I went, perfect, because you need the exercise. And she laughed and she said, yep, I probably do. So I said, okay, so at least twice a week, if not 3 times a week, I want you walking to the grocery store to get your fresh groceries, come home and prepare them, do your own cooking. Now, she wasn't trying to get pregnant, but we were really working with her to get her blood sugars balanced, to stop the weight gain. And I know her family, so I know that at some point in time, she wants to get married and she wants to have children. And so we needed to start working now, so that when she finds a spouse, when she finds the right guy, she can do that and not have to spend 2 or 3 or 4 years getting her system in order. So again, this classic symptoms of PCOS, cycles more than 6 weeks apart. Classic definition is fewer than 9 cycles per year. Weight gain. And when we add to it the gateway arch, we know instantly, and we put the gateway arch on top of the contraction furrows, we get a very clear picture of what direction we need to go with her. Not that we can diagnose her as having PCOS, and I don't need to give it a name. I understand her inherent predisposition towards blood sugar imbalances and towards needing to balance her vitamin B, vitamin C, calcium, magnesium more effectively. All right, does that make sense? So I'm not seeing a disease name in the eye. What I'm seeing is predispositions, and because I understand how those predispositions can link together, it means I can create effective programs without ever naming a disease process. Does that make sense? Is that fitting for you? Okay, so these last 3 sets of eyes all ended up with a diagnosis of PCOS from the doctors. Their eyes were so very different. But looking at the markings, understanding what those markings mean, and going beyond that and asking the client questions to understand how their symptoms tie into the markings, how the markings explain why the symptoms are the way they are, gives us the information we need. Now, just as we saw in the first PCOS slide we looked at, she actually did a great job of cleaning up her diet. She lost a ton of weight. She restored her fertility. Her eye markings didn't change because the eye markings are the inherent predispositions. They are not the result of an imbalance. They are the suggestion of the potential for an imbalance. So we have to understand what the markings mean. It's not a one-to-one correlation. This is another client who came to me with fertility challenges. Okay, now you probably are recognizing some of the indicators that I'm seeing here. She and her hubby had tried for over a year to get pregnant with no luck whatsoever. Now, as you look at this, you're saying, oh, well, she's got these petal-shaped markings. Well, I'm going to tell you, she's got them. Her blood sugars were perfectly balanced because her diet was incredible. Like, I want to live with her. Her diet was that good, right? Organic. We needed to get her to have a little more protein, but not a lot. She has a good physical activity level. So her cycles were regular. And then we see that she's got, and you might have to look really closely, she's got some of the contraction furrows. She's got contraction furrows. And there's one other very subtle marking which doesn't show up clearly on the camera for Instagram or even on the screen very well, because it's very, very subtle for those of you who are with me on the webinar. And it's an indicator that suggests she may actually have problems with methylating her B complex. So when we take in B vitamins, they have to be, our body has to adapt them, has to tweak them, if you will, has to fine tune them so we can actually use them. Particularly folic acid and B12, right? Have to be prepared for our bodies to use them properly. And if our bodies are not capable of that, then the versions that we can't use can build up and become toxic. If we don't have them in the right form, if our body can't change them to the right form, we end up with other problems. And one of those problems can be an impact on fertility. So I recognized that in her eyes immediately and suggested that we needed to get her onto the right form of B vitamins. So the prenatal vitamin that I recommend for my clients has the right form in, because over half of North Americans don't do their B vitamins properly. They don't methylate them right. And so we had her on those vitamins, and this is a client who's very anxious all the time. And every little hiccup in the day in her mind is a major crisis. So halfway through her pregnancy, she did 23andMe. She sent me the results, and the email that she sent me was vibrating with anxiety. I could feel it coming through my computer. It was intense. And as I read her concerns, I said, you have nothing to worry about, because I suspected this from this one marking that I saw. And I have been giving you the protocol that has you covered, that is working with that so that you don't need to worry about it. And she was tremendously relieved. She went on to have a beautiful baby boy, and we were very excited about that. Now, again, looking at these 4 sets of eyes that we've looked at that all have a diagnosis of PCOS, you can't tell from looking at their eyes that they have PCOS. You have to take the eye markings, combine it with their symptoms, and then you actually don't get to call it PCOS unless you're a medical doctor or a naturopath. But you have that gives you the understanding of, if they've got the long cycles, why? And if they don't have long cycles, but they're not getting pregnant, what else could it be, right? And the eyes give us those kinds of clues when it's chemistry based. So this is just so critical, that the eyes help me to understand the roots of the problems. And that's exactly what I teach my students when they study with me. We don't just learn markings. We learn, how does this teach us about the root of the problem? This is an interesting client, and I have to teach you a bit of anatomy here, because I had to learn this anatomy for this client. I know about the liver. I know about the gallbladder. I know about the bile duct. I know about the pancreatic duct. I know how they become the common bile duct. But what I didn't know was about this little thing called the Sphincter of Body, right? So what happened here is, this has been a client that's been a client of mine for many, many years, and he kind of disappeared for a few years, and that's okay. Clients often do that. When he came back, he said, I have got a problem. I've got this gut pain that just won't go away. And I said, okay, tell me about it. And he said, well, it just won't go away. And I said, so what has changed in the last 5 years since I saw you last? He said, oh, well, I had my gallbladder removed. Oh, okay. So this one I did have to do research on, because it was like, he had his gallbladder removed. Why would he now have gut pain from that? Is it because he's not digesting his fats properly and that's an irritant? Is it because there's some kind of a blockage, has something strictured in his intestinal tract. What has gone on here? And so I did some research and I discovered information. I didn't discover this, but I discovered information about this thing called the Sphincter of Body. This is a sphincter that regulates the release of bile and pancreatic juices into the small intestine. It is a common problem that when people have had the gallbladder removed, the Sphincter of Body runs into trouble. And so far what we know, because it's a common problem, but there's no common understanding of it yet, is there's a suspicion that it's either the sphincter gets trapped in a spasm cycle, or that scar tissue forms that spasms and locks the sphincter in a narrower position so that the bile can't come through, and the pancreatic juices can't come through, which leads to pain in that upper duodenal area. So over time, typically what happens with this is that Sphincter of Body opening gets narrower and narrower and narrower. So could I have seen in his eye that he, number one, had gallstones, and number two, was going to have Sphincter of Body problems? Let's take a look. This is his eyeball. This is the eye, and your gallbladder only shows up in the right eye. This is his right eye. The gallbladder shows up in the right eye right around here. Is there anything there that tells me that he is going to have gallstones? Absolutely not. Why not? Because gallstones are not a part of the genes, right? They're not genetic. They are situational. Is there anything there that tells me he would have a Sphincter of Body problem? Well, I'll tell you something. That Sphincter of Body is so tiny that in the eyeball, it's probably, if it showed up, it would be a tiny speck, like literally barely a dot. So no, there's nothing in there that tells me that there would be a Sphincter of Body problem, because his body did not genetically know that he was going to end up having the gallbladder out. And that means that it could not have known that the Sphincter of Body would run into trouble. So there's also, this picture was taken after he had the surgery. I've got before and afters, but this was taken after the surgery. There's no indication here that he had surgery. So the idea that we can see surgery in the eye, unless it's actually a surgery on the eye, is false. And I do an entire presentation with about that, showing x-rays and surgical scars and all kinds of things, and eye photos that were current on another person. And so there's no indicator of surgery. There's no indicator of anything for the Sphincter of Body. And so this then suggests that the inherent gallbladder issues could have been triggered possibly by his inherent predisposition towards being over acid. But actually, you know, when we look at this on a deeper level, here's what we need to know. Gallstones, emotionally, energetically, are the result of unresolved anger. So when he came in and we were talking about this, and I know this man to be gentle and kind and generous and thoughtful. He's very tall. He's got to be like 6'4". He's of large stature. He's not overweight or anything, but large, strong looking, right? And the nicest man you would ever care to meet. But I know the industry he works in. I know how nasty it can be. And so I asked him, so do you think you've got some unresolved anger? And he looked at me and he started laughing, and I went, that's a yes, isn't it? And he said, yeah, it is. And I said, well, I'm going to give you the best health advice I can here. And that is, take up meditation, do what you need to learn to let go of the anger, because the unresolved anger that is swept under the carpet and ignored is what ultimately leads to gallstones, right? So because he had unresolved anger, which is not a chemistry problem, right? He was probably taught as a child that it's not nice to get mad. If you're mad, you pretend it doesn't happen and you just go on with life. So we needed to go back and have him work with retraining to learn the right ways to express anger, ways to let go of anger, because if he doesn't learn that, the anger is going to show up somewhere else in his body. And we don't want that, because it just gets nastier than gallstones if we don't get it dealt with. All right. So we weren't able to see a predisposition to gallstones. We couldn't see the result of surgery. We couldn't see sphincter of body, because none of those things are genetic. None of those things are his genetic potential. It played back to his emotions, and that's where we needed to work. So where does this leave you? Well, it really doesn't matter if you're a herbalist, a nutrition coach, an aromatherapist, or a naturopath. If you stay with me, I do lots of free trainings. I can show you some of the insights you can gain from doing constitutional iridology with your clients. And this is so important, because what I see online are a lot of posts from people who are posting their very badly done, I might add, eye photos, saying, tell me what's wrong and tell me what I can do about it, or what supplements should I take, what should I eat. I also see from that a lot of iridologists diagnosing and prescribing from these really awful photos without any background information. Iridology is not a crystal ball. It's not a party game. It's an assessment tool. So the answer to the question we opened with of, is iridology a diagnostic tool, or what can we diagnose? We can't diagnose anything. It's not a diagnostic tool. Iridology is an assessment tool. It teaches us which questions to ask. The eyes don't give us answers to those questions, but it teaches us what questions to ask. The eyes don't give us disease names. They don't even tell us what recommendations we need to consider making. They guide our questioning, and they give us deeper understanding as to why our client is having the kind of health issues they're having. Does that make sense? A little bit different from a lot of what you're seeing. Hi, Pam. Hi, Sayed. Hi, Virgie. Good to see you. Robert, good to see you on Flying O2. We've had a lot of people join us on Instagram. Thanks for being there. Iridology, again, is an assessment tool. It points the way to the questions we should ask. And it guides us in the dietary and supplement recommendations we want to make, while suggesting what the genetic potential is for that organ, that system, that body. It is not diagnostic. So going back to what I said at the very beginning of this web class, if you've been hanging out with me for any length of time, what about PCOS with shorter cycles? That, LinCap, sorry, is not a topic of conversation for this particular webinar, because we're focusing on iridology right now. But thanks for the question. You know, we can always do with you, Lynn, a private consultation to answer your PCOS issues and help you create a program. That would be helpful. Feel free to private message me if you'd like to follow up with that and get more information about doing that. So if you've been hanging out with me for any length of time, again, you know I've got the two missions in my business. Number one is to mentor practitioners who are struggling in their businesses because they spend too much time that they're not getting paid for creating client programs. The second one is, my second mission is to teach the truth about iridology and its proper application in a wellness practice. For the past several years, I've been teaching wellness practitioners just like you the art and science of constitutional iridology. Registration for the next class, which is going to start on October 7th, is going to be opening soon. The course is called Confident Nutritionist, the Dynamic Iridology Assessment System. And I'd love to share the details of that class with you, but that's not what you came for. And so I'm just going to take, with your permission, like 30 seconds to drop this little blurb. Confident Nutritionist Dynamic Iridology Assessment System is a live, online, fully mentored program for nutritionists, herbalists, and naturopaths who want to streamline their clinical work without sacrificing client care. So they can stop working unpaid overtime to develop client programs, so they can stop overwhelming their clients with undoable programs, and so they can create programs that will increase client compliance, success, and long-term retention. If you would like to know more, we are running an info session on Thursday, August 27th, 5 p.m. Mountain Time. So right now it's 11:41 a.m. Mountain Time, if that helps you. And if you would like to just attend this no obligation information session, hop on over to iridology.education/webinar and get registered for it. This web class, this little info session will be an excellent opportunity to learn a little bit more about iridology, how to use it in your wellness coaching business, and what to expect from this program. There will also be a very special bonus for those who attend this particular info session. So again, iridology.education/webinar if you would like to get registered for the next info session for the Confident Nutritionist Dynamic Iridology Assessment System program. So with that, my friends, thank you so much for being with me. I have enjoyed it tremendously. I hope you've learned something that is useful and maybe even just gained some really great insight into what iridology is and how it works. And I hope to see you soon. So feel free to join me for the info session. And I'll see you Friday at 12 noon Mountain Time for another free training. Bye for now.